I think I
Yeah,
have some more to say. I think
being recorded.
she also is very much interested in ecology and human rights, and has lived in Kansas as well as Odisha, India. So this has been foundational to her thinking. She currently works in solidarity with groups supporting immigrants and other marginalized and displaced communities. Her poetry books include Weeds Lovers, 10 Years in the Shadow of September, On the Line, and Gravity Prevails. Welcome, Kamala.
Thank you. Thank you. I am speaking today. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'll go ahead. I'm speaking from San Antonio, Texas, a city that has been a gathering place for traveling people such as the Payayas and other Coahuitecan communities for millennia. Their names are from Spanish, revealing our gap in knowledge of and connection to those who peopled this land in the past. These peoples and those native tribes who came later, many of which Usha mentioned, because Austin's just up the road, deserve not only our acknowledgement, but land and all the rights of first citizenship on this continent. I also recognize that the very concept of land ownership runs counter to responsible reciprocal relationships that many indigenous peoples hold toward the lands where they live, and that the North American continent has always been a place of movement, and traveling across the continent is the rightful inheritance of all who are indigenous here. As I thought about what to share as an introduction to Matwaala's Native American Poetry panel, I kept returning to Native connections and concepts that have been grounding for me, going back to my childhood. My first such memory is of accompanying my parents to a meeting of a Kansas Native group who had invited them to speak. My parents had spent several years as part of an American Friends Service Committee village project in then Orissa, India. And the group was interested in learning more about the Indian people from South Asia that their people had once been mistaken for. The beaded pin that I have right here that they gave to my mother, and she passed on to me, is a keepsake. This gift has significance as an example of what I'd later learn about as cultural poetics, artistic expression, sometimes also addressing social and environmental justice concerns, often, but not necessarily in words. In this case, it was the poetry of colored beads, a time of cultural exchange and reciprocity, and the memory seems right for telling this evening. Subsequent interweaving events come together for me as Native American poetics in action, presenting historical and political concerns and land experience that reaches back over the decades and forward with wise words for our future. During high school, I spent much of a summer in Hammond, Oklahoma, a Cheyenne Arapaho community. Lawrence Hart and his family hosted a community voluntary service camp for young people. As a Cheyenne peace chief and a Mennonite pastor, he has enjoined traditions of peace in his life and teachings. Helping with the summer school there was my first formal teaching experience. The name of my 2014 chapbook, Weeds Lovers, comes from the translation of the name in Cheyenne my friends gave me when they saw me exclaim over the roadside wildflowers when we went walking. In 1978, one branch of the longest walk came through my hometown of Newton, Kansas, and I joined a group of local supporters who shared a potluck meal and fellowship with the walkers. 30 years later, one group of walkers with the longest walk too would stop at the Middle Arc Center for a night's rest. These walkers precede the water protectors currently standing against Line 3 and now Line 5 and other fossil fuel pipelines, and climate justice walkers, often led by Indigenous people worldwide. And now in San Antonio, protecting migratory water birds and heritage trees in a park on sacred land of springs and caverns. I was in a small group led by Joy Harjo, now our National Poet Laureate, at one of the first conferences I attended. Her mentorship and her reading were the memorable element of the conference. Later, as a colleague of Pramila's at Nassau Community College, I was teaching from Joy Harjo's book, The Spiral of Memory, when I learned she was going to be playing and reading with her band in Manhattan. A few creative writing students accompanied me to the poetry concert, and the inspiration and mentorship I'd felt spiraled out to my students. And I continue in my online classes of writing, teach her work. Some of the first written native poetry I read in the pages of Akwesasne Notes, published by the Mohawk Nation. I first read Chicano poetry that I now teach and study and love in that publication. Later, I worked with Raul R. Salinas at Resistencia Bookstore as a grad student in Austin. Raul, who got his start as a poet in prison, had been able to leave prison on the stipulation that he could not go back to Texas for some time. And he found both a welcoming and solidarity work with Indian communities in Washington State. His work with Native brothers and sisters and his indigenous heritage led him to identify as a Chican Indio poet. And in his book, Indio Trails, a Chicano Odyssey through Indian country, his poetry, quoting Luis Mendoza, shows us the true nature of solidarity as a communion of mind, body, and spirit in concordance with something larger than our individual selves. As I reflect on what these and other experiences together bring together for me in a broad sense, poetry, I discern the wide parameters of poetry and its connections to lived experience and politics and cultural expression. In these instances, there is the common presence of what I would call lyric testimonial, a community story told through someone that has lived the experience in full. As I've read some of the work from the poets tonight and saw the artist's work, I felt the same excitement that came with the connections I've related, and I'm excited by the network of connections these poets bring. This is fitting given the multitude tongues and the many languages that make up the antecedents of Native American poetry. A few years back, their numbers were made real to me when I decided to make up a placard for a protest march against a push for English only in Texas. I decided on the phrase Atzlan preceded America, drawing on the name of the northern homeland of those who settled in now Mexico City. And to get my point across, I darkened in the letters with the names of languages from Indian nations. I nearly missed the march and never finished the lettering. There were so many languages, I could not fit them all in. This is what I'd like to leave you with. This reality of the many, many languages in which poetry has been spoken, written, beaded, marched, walked, danced, and read on this continent for millennia.
Thank you very much, Kamala.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kamala, for taking us on a journey that was both personal and communal, and bringing to us again the very essence of poetry and its ability to bring people together, so much needed in the times we're in. We appreciate the time that you took to share that with us. I'm very excited to introduce Jeremy Dennis. He holds an MFA from Penn State. He's a contemporary fine art photographer and lives and works on the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Southampton, New York. In his work, he explores Indigenous identity, color, and assimilation. Dennis was one of 10 recipients of a 2016 Dream Starter grant from the national nonprofit organization Running Strong for American Indian Youth. He was awarded $10,000 to pursue his project on the site. Most recently, Dennis received the Creative Bursar Award from Getty Images in 2018 to continue his series titled Stories. He's participated in numerous residencies such as Yado and exhibited extensively as group and solo. We seem to be forced to kind of abridge all these wonderful bios. There's just so much to share. So there's so much more to that, but I think just the constraints of time, we're highlighting some salient events. So we hand it over to you, Jeremy, now.
Thanks so much. Well, to begin, I'm going to share my screen. So I'll just give that a moment to load. You should see a red house with 4 people sitting on a stoop. Hello again, everyone. My name is Jeremy Dennis. I'm from the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Southampton, New York. I really want to thank Pramila for the invitation to present briefly tonight. We spoke, I believe, back in late 2021, so it's been a long time coming. It's also really beautiful that we can still meet together in mass during COVID online. I hope to do a very brief presentation, 15 minutes or so, just on a personal project called Ma's House, which you see on screen, a little bit of a background of the Shinnecock Nation, where Andrina Smith and I are tribal members and enrolled. And just to give a caption for this first image, on the top right, this is Bro Brewery, one of our artist residents, along with Pamela Council, who had a really amazing installation in Times Square with all the different fingernails for survivors, and her friend who came and I sitting on the stoop. There were multiple land acknowledgements, but I wanted to include this because it's so amazing that Shinnecock still has a sliver of its traditional territory today. I put a little star where the Shinnecock Reservation is, which is about 800 square acres versus the more than 4,000 square acres that we once thrived upon. So it's always great to do these acknowledgements because nothing is possible without the land and the place to conduct these type of events. So if you can give, it is important to give if you can. This is a image of our community center here on the Shinnecock Reservation. This is literally in the heart of the territory, our community center. And so on the left, we have the Presbyterian Church. The center used to be mostly for tribal offices, but now it's kind of for weddings and receptions and just community get-togethers. And on the right is actually a very long mural by my mom, Denise Silva Dennis, who led a communal mural project back in the 1990s. I really love mapping, so I wanted to include a satellite image of the reservation. We're surrounded by water on 3 sides, the Shinnecock Bay. And my grandmother always said, we're still here because there was really nowhere for Southampton colonists to push us back to. We were surrounded by the water. And speaking of water, if you're from Long Island or if you live in the area, you really can't escape the water. So Shinnecock itself translates to people of the stony shore. I always try to respect our flag, but if you compare ours to the US flag, for example, it's much more complicated. There's like people in it, there's canoers, a lot of different details and colors. Most importantly, I think, are the 2 right whales at the bottom. They're a species that are endangered, but they're indigenous to our local Atlantic Ocean and bays. And so that's part of our tradition of respecting them in a sacred way and trying to retain them as a species. Along other symbols are the box turtle, representing the 13 tribes of Long Island in its different sections. We were once canoers. That's how we sometimes hunted whales and canoed up to Connecticut. And Shinnecock Indian Nation, it's kind of in a gridded format. That's actually done in wampum beadwork, done in 2 separate belts in this case. So there's a lot more symbolism, but I'll skip for the sake of time. One of our biggest accomplishments recently was in 2010 when we received our federal recognition. After 30 years of petitioning with local Suffolk, New York, and federal courts, we finally joined over 570 other federally recognized tribes, which means that we are recognized by the United States as a sovereign nation. We have a distinct connection with the place we call home, Shinnecock. We have our own genealogy, our own language, and our own history. And some people would say conflict with the United States in that way. So it is amazing that there are 570 groups that have this title. But as I said before, we're the only one out of 13 on Long Island that have that title. The Unkachog in Mastic Beach area only have state recognition. And I believe it's only about 4 in all of New York State, which is amazing. This is a map of Shinnecock territory, going back to just representing like where we are, some of our history of staying in the same place. The rectangle in green represents our current territory, and the darker tone to the north represents sort of our land before 1859. And if you're familiar with the East End or Long Island, you can notice that the Long Island Railroad is absent. Once that was established and it was decided by our neighbors that this would become a resort area, Shinnecock people were quickly deceived, lied to, signatures were forged, and all of this land to the north of this green rectangle was stolen from us. So in many different ways, that 2010 mission to get our federal recognition was a promise to us that we would get this land back, but we're still fighting for that today. If you have heard of Shinnecock, I hope it's beyond just our cigarettes. I think that we're probably most known for our annual powwow. Since 1946, Shinnecock has been the host of this public gathering. And so if you don't know what a powwow is, it's a celebration of our traditional and contemporary dance, craft, art, and indigenous food. And it's really just a gathering of nations, and depending on who comes and who's available. And so this, as an artist and photographer, this is really where I started the work that I'm known for today, which is about indigenous representation and identity. This is a portrait of Shanae Bullock, who's also from the Shinnecock Nation. And she has so many different titles, and you could probably follow her on social media and learn more about her initiatives. But going forward in time in my own portfolio, I wanted to just point in some highlights from each portfolio. This is a separate series called Stories. And when I was in school or in college, I was taking all these different art history courses, and I was always taught that European art or Eurocentric art or Italian Renaissance art was the best pinnacle of art. I pretty much had to take those classes to graduate, but sitting there in the classroom, I thought, like, where's the indigenous representation? Like all these biblical stories being represented in paintings and put on these pedestals. And so with my huge collection of different powwow photos, I decided to mix and match different elements, sort of like paper collage on a single composition. And so in this image alone, this is actually my backyard here on the reservation. So we have a lot of marshlands, we have a lot of grasslands, and these are just two different dancers that were never in the same image, which is really fun to create and work with. Back in 2015, in sort of criticizing my own work in a way, I think that when we think of Native Americans, we might think of like the Mohegans or the Indian in the cupboard. We still have these old stereotypes that Native people are either stuck in the past, or they have to be represented in popular culture as this noble savage or this kind of sacred mythical figure. And so I was looking at Facebook's Humans of New York by Brandon Stanton, and I wanted to create a similar series that was more in the realm of documentary work. And so I won't show you more than this image, but for me, this was an amazing opportunity to show the world kind of who we are, show that factually there are indigenous people in the Northeast, east of the Mississippi, here in New York State, and here in the Hamptons. And so for me, it was just an amazing and empowering project that not only shows people kind of the defiance of who we are and the resilience that we're still here, but it was also just my own observation that when you go to the powwow celebration, usually you go through the gate, you pay $15, you bring your beach chair, and then you just sit and watch the dancers from afar. No one really gets that intimate or connection or empathy through the stories that this book presents. I also want to mention on this site, Indigenous Long Island, this is a 2016 project that's been ongoing, which was made possible by a national nonprofit called Running Strong for American Indian Youth. This is a public and free to access archive of Long Island, New York's Indigenous history. And so all these different polygons and shapes represent different Indigenous communities, both historical and contemporary. And all of these different icons represent unique site-specific histories as well. So my hope is that as the years go on, people will realize that we're really everywhere. We aren't this kind of like exotic thing that you have no connection to. We're just really everywhere through our thousands of years of presence. And so this is kind of what it looks like. If you click one of those nodes, it kind of looks like Wikipedia. And you can click on keywords if you want to learn more and look at the reference material, because as I said before, I'm an artist and photographer. And so a lot of this work was done by historians, anthropologists, tribal members providing information and so on. So the website's on the bottom right if you wanted to write it down, or you could just Google on this site as well. The last project I quickly wanted to mention is a new up and coming one from 2020. This is called Ma's House and BIPOC Art Studio Incorporated. And this is a house that's on the Shinnecock Reservation. It's really sort of a silver lining type of project, which was an outcome both of COVID-19 and social distancing. And as an artist, you pretty much had all your opportunities either canceled or indefinitely postponed. And so my schedule opened up, and I and my family started working on this old family home that was ready to pretty much fall in on itself. It was a project that involved a lot of contributions, donations, but it also was a really important project that was special to our family. So there was a lot of volunteering. There were a lot of people who connected to the story of the house. I grew up in this house. My older sister did. My two twin cousins did. And Ma's House actually is named after my grandmother, Loretta Silva, who you can see on the right, sort of cropped out. And so in June 2020, we started a GoFundMe campaign to try to restore the house. As you can imagine, an artist doesn't really have that much money to invest in such a project, especially in such a high real estate market area. And so we started a GoFundMe. It picked up a lot of steam. We raised over $40,000. And through that generosity, we really wanted to dedicate this to public kind of both entertainment, education, artists of color to thrive and be here and have a space that they feel like they belong. It really came out of the Black Lives Matter movement as well. Just the fact that people are realizing that no, not all people have the same access to opportunities, to wealth, especially out here, generational wealth. There's just so many things that are both dividing us and were being highlighted in this past 2 years. And so there's still a lot of work that we're doing, but it's really just a family project. And I think that anyone who runs a space or has a home kind of knows the story, just like we live pretty much at sea level as well. So it's always a story of sealing up gaps, making sure no moisture or water leaks in. It's also a place where I live as well. So this is really the first time in my life that I've had a reliable studio space. So I think that when we think of the East End, we think like there's such a thriving community of artists. There's like the Jackson Pollock House, and there's just all these vacant studios. But for me, finally, when I was 30 years old, I was able to have a little bit of space as an artist. And so part of the big project of Ma's House is an artist residency for artists of color. This includes poets, of course, but this is a photo of our first resident artist, Yan Yan Huang. She's based in the boroughs of New York City. But as you can see, this is just an opportunity to come, feel like you belong, an opportunity to get away from the craziness of daily life. And you could be very ambitious like Yan Yan, or you could just come and relax, just take a bath, bring a book, go to the beach. We also are a host of different programs as well. So this is Shinnecock tribal member Shane Weeks leading a history class at Ma's house with some of our tribal members. We were also very happy to have Andrina Smith, who's going to perform tonight. She did her performance Left Behind / Within as part of the Gather series in association with Guildhall. And so the best way, if you want to learn more, especially if you're an artist of color and want to be involved or do the residency, you can go to www.mashouse.studio. And if you're someone who knows someone, you can also tell them that they can donate. Anything over $250 is tax deductible. We finally got our 501 status in October, which is amazing. And this is the last slide. I just want to end with ways that you can get in touch. I also want to mention that I curated an all native show at the Southampton Art Center, which ends on April 9th. And actually on April 8th, there's going to be an in-person poetry reading by Joy Harjo at Southampton Stony Brook campus. So I'll pop that in the chat once I'm done sharing, but thank you all for your time.
Wow. That's great. Thank you, Jeremy. Just absolutely riveting and hypnotic. I just wish we had more time to see more and hear more, but we're so grateful you brought your art today, and I just I'm at a loss. It was beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Lucille Langday. She is the author of 4 poetry chapbooks and 7 full-length poetry collections, including Birds of San Pancho and other poems of place and becoming an ancestor. She has also co-edited 2 anthologies, Fire and Rain, Eco Poetry of California and Red Indian Road West, Native American Poetry from California, and published 2 children's books and a memoir, Married at 14, A True Story. Her many honors include the Blue Light Poetry Prize, 2 Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Awards, the Joseph Henry Jackson Award, and 11 Pushcart Prize nominations. The founder and publisher of a small press, Colored Tanager Books. She lives in Oakland, California. She is of Wampanoag, British and Swiss German descent. Welcome, Lucille.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Pramila. I'm very happy to be here tonight. I am reading on the traditional land of the Chochenyo Ohlone people. The Ohlones and their ancestors were here in the San Francisco Bay Area for more than 10,000 years before the arrival of Europeans. And the Ohlones are still here. And I want to thank them for their long stewardship of this land. And also, I want to acknowledge that since the US Congress never ratified any of the treaties with California tribes, the Ohlones never ceded any land to the US. So I'm going to be reading from 3 of my books. And I'm going to begin with a poem from this anthology that I co-edited, Red Indian Road West, Native American Poetry from California. And this poem is called At Lake Tahoe. Granite mountains, dense with white firs, lodgepole pines, and ponderosas, rise abruptly from the lake's blue bowl, so deep its waters could cover all of California and Nevada. The Washos, who lived here 10,000 summers, named it Lake in the Sky because it reflected clouds, sunset, and stars. They caught lahontan trout in the lake, mountain whitefish in icy streams. On the other side of the continent, my Wampanoag ancestors were gathering cranberries, covering their summer homes with cattail mats. baking clams, drying corn, and fishing for salmon off Cape Cod. The Washos used only fallen trees for homes they would dismantle before leaving Lake in the Sky each winter. In fall, they gathered pinyon pine nuts to eat until spring. This was before white people came and cut down the pinyon pines to build their houses, dynamited the mountains in search of silver and gold, and claimed the fish. Now, a paddle boat with 3 decks takes tourists on cruises of Lake Tahoe. Yet in summer, Washos still do the pine knot dance, and Wampanoags do the grass dance to keep the world in balance and remind us that the earth is living, every rock is sacred, and every tree and salmon has a soul. And next, I'm going to read a couple of poems from my collection, Becoming an Ancestor. And those are my 4 grandparents on the cover. And my mother's maternal grandfather was Wampanoag, but my mother's mother died when my mother was only 7 years old, and she and her sister were adopted by a non-native couple who brought them from Massachusetts to California. After my mother's death, I decided I wanted to meet the Wampanoags. She had been estranged from her family, her Wampanoag family. So I called the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and said I wanted to come visit. And I did visit. And the first thing anyone said to me when I arrived was "Welcome home." And I wrote a poem about that. Welcome home to Mashpee, where snapping turtles and painted turtles bask on logs in the marsh amid water willows, ferns, and pickerel weed with purple flowers reaching up from the shallows. Welcome home to the place where your great-grandfather whispered to trout he caught at Santuit Pond, then sat in a circle and offered his pipe to earth, sky, and the 4 directions. Welcome home to the coast where your ancestors built Wetuwash and gathered cranberries, to the woods where they hunted turkey, deer, and bear, and to the clearings clad in goldenrods and asters, where they danced for 10,000 years. Welcome home. The elders have been waiting for you. Listen to their drums, the beat of your own heart. Take this wampum necklace made from the sacred shell of the quahog clam. When you wear it, walk through redroot and wild lupin. Hear the quickening rhythm of the field sparrow's song. And next, I will read a poem called Instructions for a Wampanoag Clam Bake. Wade into Papanesset Bay to collect some rock people. Old round stones smoothed by the tide. Remember Moshup, the giant who predicted the arrival of white men. When he said goodbye to the people of the first light, he turned into a whale. Find a place in forest shade, make a circle and dig a shallow round hole for the stones. Moshup's friend, the giant frog, came to the cliffs and wept. Changed into a rock, he still sits at Gay Head today and looks out to sea. Before finding dry wood for the fire, your gift from the forest, notice the shape of the hole and the stones. All life is a circle. When the tide is low, gather quahog and sickasog clams and plenty of rockweed, whose stipes are loaded with brine. Light a fire over the stones, and when the rock people start to glow, pile rockweed on them. This is their blanket. As salt water is released from the stipes and steam rises, add clams, lobsters, corn, more armfuls of rockweed. This is the Appanog, seafood cooking. Now thank Katanet, who saw the frog's sorrow and turned him into a rock out of pity, and taught the people to use the earth, plants, animals, and water to care for themselves after Moshe left. The deer will always make you laugh. The mountain lion take your side. The star people shine on your path if you do it this way. Thank you. And I will conclude with two poems from my newest poetry collection, Birds of San Pancho and Other Poems of Place. This one is called Behind the Scenes at the Museum, and it takes place at the Science Museum of Minnesota in St. Paul. A science museum, big as a factory, as much underground as above, wide white basement hallways, fabrication rooms, stored collections. A giant door leads to a gallery of room-sized vaults where temperature, humidity, and light are controlled. In one, shelves hold jars of creatures floating and fixative, shrimp, crabs, mice, fetal mountain goats. Another has drawers of insects, a huge butterfly with blue iridescent wings, a stick bug 1 foot long from South America, a whole vault for dinosaur bones, another where a bison skeleton has been assembled, then blessed by tribal elders. More treasures, a fossil tortoise 350,000 years old, a bald eagle, its white tail and brown wings spread in a drawer. Earrings of tiny green beetle wings, and a necklace of small birds from Peru. From the plains, beaded moccasins and dresses, samples of corn, miniature ears, red or brown, more than 100 years old, more nutritious and tasty, the curator says, than corn today. Some corn now exists only here, but the museum is planting seeds to give the corn back to the tribes who gave it to early anthropologists who couldn't give them back their land, but at least thought to save the sacred corn. And I'm going to conclude with a poem that it's longer than the others. It's called Names of the States. Alabama for the Alabama tribe, forced from Alabama to Texas when white people claimed their land in 1805. Alaska for the Aleut word Alyeska, meaning mainland, the place toward which the sea flows. Arizona, the word for small spring in the O'odham language of a Southwest desert people who couldn't vote until 1948. Arkansas, another name for the Quapaws, the downstream people who were removed to Oklahoma from their ancestral lands. Connecticut, from the Algonquian word for long river place. Delaware, from Baron de la Warr, Virginia's first governor, whose name rechristened the local Lenni Lenape, the first tribe to sign a treaty with the US. Hawaii, for Hawaii Loa, discoverer of the islands in Polynesian myth. Idaho, maybe Shoshone for the sun comes down the mountain, or the Apache name for the Comanches who drove them from the southern plains. Illinois, a French transliteration of Illinois, the Ojibwe word for the Anoka, whose 13 tribes were reduced to 5 by European disease. Indiana, land of the Indians, the Delaware, Piankashaw, Kickapoo, Wea, Shawnee, Miami, and Potawatomi, who were mostly removed by 1846. Iowa, from the Dakota name for the Iowa tribe, meaning sleepy ones. Kansas, the Dakota word for the South Wind people, whose last fluent speaker of the Kansa language died in 1983. Kentucky, derived from the Iroquoian word for on the meadow. Massachusetts, people of the Great Hills, that is, the Blue Hills south of Boston Harbor, who were decimated by smallpox in 1633. Michigan, from Mishigamaa, great water in the language of the Ojibwe, who, like so many others, didn't understand the treaties ceding their land. Minnesota, from Minnesota, the name the Dakotas gave the Minnesota River, whose clear blue water reflected clouds. Mississippi, from Mississippi, Ojibwe for the great river, along which more than 20 tribes lived and fished. Missouri, for the Missouri tribe that lived on the Missouri River, a Siouan people whose name means town of the big canoes. Nebraska, from Nebraska, the Omaha word for broad water, a description of the Platt River by which the tribe lived. New Mexico, named for the Mexicas, a Nahuatl-speaking people who ruled the Aztec Empire until the Spanish conquered them in 1619. North and South Dakota, named for a Sioux tribe whose men were sentenced in 1862 to the largest mass execution in US history, though Dakota means friend. Ohio, from Ohio, continuously giving river in the language of the Senecas, whose land was flooded in 1965 following construction of Kanzua Dam. Oklahoma, from Oklahoma, Choctaw for red people, a name proposed by the chief of the Choctaw Nation during treaty negotiations in 1866. Oregon, maybe from Warrigan, an Algonquian word for beautiful river, but so many native words and languages have been lost that it's hard to say. Tennessee, for the Cherokee town Tanasi, a village on the Little Tennessee River until the Cherokees were marched to Oklahoma along the Trail of Tears. Texas, meaning friends or allies in the language of the Caddos, who were removed to Oklahoma in 1859. Utah, from Utahai, an Apache word meaning people of the mountains. Wisconsin, from Misconsin, the name for the Wisconsin River in the Miami language, river running through a red place. Wyoming, a contraction of Mechi-Weamiing, a Delaware word first used for a valley in Pennsylvania, meaning at the big plains. And yes, every part of this land is Indian country, from forest to desert, mountain to prairie, Manhattan to Yosemite, Tallahassee to Seattle, all the fields, rivers, hills, and canyons between the two shining seas. Thank you. Or as we would say in Wampanoag, Kutapudish.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Lucille. You have a line in a poem called Tooth Painter that says, "A gallery opens when I smile." I'd like to play on that and say a gallery of nature opens its art in your poems. You've welcomed us to reimagine land as the space of one's heart in the boundaries of memory and history. Your poetry of lush images are odes to nature, place, and land, are songs of dignity and also simultaneously gritty and celebratory, rooted in contemporary life. Indeed, again, to use your own lines, the body of your poetry is a golden chalice filled with guts. I'm thinking of so many of your wonderful poems, In Orbit, in Red, and in Winter's Nap. just beautiful images, recurring images, celebratory. So my question to you is about the anthem of celebration in your poems, the grit to celebrate life, not to let that right be taken away. So how do you keep that spirit intact and do it with poetry while keeping it also experiential?
Lucille, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, I tried to unmute, but it wouldn't let me. So I'm glad that we were able to make it happen. Yeah, so I think, yeah, there are one of my strategies for remaining optimistic and celebrating life is to spend time out in nature. And I think that being in touch with the natural world, and we have it in California, the ocean, and we have the redwood forests and the Sierra, and it's just it's extremely rewarding and restorative to spend time in nature. And also I believe in the goodness of people, and I believe in the power of people to bring about love and peace, even though, you know, despite all of the horrible things that happen in the world, despite the wars and the acts of people against each other, I think it's really good to focus on all that's good in the human heart.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucille. That was spectacular. And now we are going on to our next poet, Lyla June. I met Lyla June many years ago at Stony Brook, where she had come to perform, and I fell in love with her voice. And I said, oh, we have to get Lyla here. Lyla June is an Indigenous musician, scholar, and community organizer of Navajo, Cheyenne and European lineages. Her dynamic multi-genre presentation style has engaged audiences across the globe towards personal, collective, and ecological healing. She blends studies in human ecology at Stanford, graduate work in Indigenous pedagogy, and the traditional worldview she grew up with to inform her music, perspectives, and solutions. Her recent performances include Indigenous Solutions Festival, Dream Warriors, Heal It Tour at ASU, Arizona, Body and Earth Conference in Minneapolis, Parliament of World Religions in Canada, Unity Earth Liftoff Festival in New York City, Compassion Camp Festival in Seattle, Voices of Sacred Earth Festival in Auckland, and so on. Her university appearances have included University of Colorado, Denver, Seattle, Stony Brook University, and many others. She is currently pursuing her doctoral degree, focusing on Indigenous food systems revitalization. Thank you, Lyla, for being here.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, you can hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lucille. That was wonderful. Yeah, that poem will go down in history, I think. The one to really do a state-by-state appraisal of the etymology of these words. I really appreciated all of your poems, and I appreciated your, you know, honoring your ancestors the way that you do. It's very inspiring. I also want to thank you too, Jeremy. That was really amazing work that your people are doing. I remember the first time I went to your homeland, and I went to speak somewhere, and one of your relatives was there, and she was wearing a beaded crown. I think she was Miss Shinnecock. And on her crown, there was a bowhead whale. And I was like, why is there a whale on your crown? She's like, well, we're whalers. And I was like, oh, dang. all we do is plant corn, you know, but it was really cool. It's just really amazing to see what a close relationship your people had with the whales. And sadly, of course, with so many things, you know, the decimation of those very vital parts of our food systems. But deep respect for both of your lineages. Yeah, I have a few poems for you all tonight. Before I speak, I want to introduce myself in my mother tongue. This is Mr. Boo too. We've been apart all day, so greetings, my kin and my people. I'm from the Nanisht Ejitachitni clan of the Dene Nation. We are also incorrectly known as Navajo. The real name is Dene. That's what we call ourselves. It's what we've called ourselves for thousands of years. Navajo is, like so many tribal names, a superimposed term that colonizers placed on us. And part of the project of colonization is to rename everything, right? To rename the people, the places, and in renaming, we thereby erase so much, because as many states were named after Native nations, so many towns were renamed Jamestown or Washington or Louisville. But instead of naming the land after ourselves, like Louisville, we tended to name ourselves after the land. So that's my first clan, Nanisht Ejitachitni. From my mother, we get our clans from our mothers. In American culture, you get your last name from your father, but in Dene world and many indigenous communities, you get your last name from your mother. So it's the Nanisht Ejitachitni clan from my mother, who got it from her mother, who got it from her mother, and so on. My second clan is my father's clan, which he got from his mother, which is Tsetsestis, which is the Cheyenne word for Cheyenne, Tsetsestis. My third clan is the Ashihe Dashiche, my mother's father's clan, which is the Salt clan of the Dene. My father's clan is the European clans. Taos, New Mexico, so I hail from Taos, New Mexico originally. And in that manner, I present myself as a Dene woman. So yeah, I'll just read a poem. It is dawn. The sun is rising in the sky, and my grandmother is teaching me the meaning of Honjon. Although there's no direct translation from Dene Bazad, the Navajo language, into English, every living being knows what Honjon means. For Honjon is every drop of rain. It's every leaf on every tree. It's your every eyelash. It's every feather on the bluebird's wing. Honjon is undeniable beauty. And my grandmother knows this well, for she speaks the same language that grew out of the desert floors, like redstone arms reaching out of the desert into the sky, like arms praising creation for all of its brilliance. Honjon is also an experience, and my grandmother knows this well, for she speaks the same language as horse hooves on birthdays. She speaks the same language as winter storms. She speaks the same language as these things, for she was a midwife, and she would gallop to the women in labor in the wintertime until she became fluent in the language of suffering mothers, fluent in the language of joyful mothers, fluent in the language of handing a glowing newborn to its creator. Honjon is an experience, but it is not something you can experience on your own, the eagles tell us, as they lock talons in the stratosphere and fall to the earth as one. Honjon is inter beauty. And my grandmother knows this well, for she speaks the same language as the male rain, which shoots lightning boys through the sky and pummels the green corn children and huddles the horses against the cliff sides in the early afternoon. She also speaks the language of the female rain, which sends the scent of dust and sage into our holons, into our homes, and casts rainbows in the sky. Astene, we know what Honjon means. And each and every human being knows what Honjon means deep down. And I believe that we also deep down know what Honjon does not mean. Like the days we walk in sadness, like the days we walk in fear, like the days we live for money, or like the days when I lived for fame, or like the days when the conquistadors came, the conquerors, when they climbed off of their horses and told us they were going to take the mountains away. And we knew this was not Honjon because we knew you could not own a mountain, but we knew we could make it Honjon once again. So we took their silver swords and we took their silver coins and we melted them with fire and buffalo hide bellows and recast them into beautiful turquoise and silver jewelry pieces and placed it around their necks. We took the helmets straight off of their heads, became silversmiths and transformed it into a fearless beauty. We made jewelry. Honjon is like this, my grandmother says. It is the healing of our broken hearts. It is the healing of our broken bones. It is the healing that will carry us through anything. It's the prayer that will carry us even through this global warming, through this global transformation, through this global fear that dances thin as illusion, like a shadow in our minds. This morning, my grandmother is teaching me something very important. She is teaching me that sometimes the easiest and most elegant way to defeat an army of hatred is to just stand before it and sing to it. Sing to it your most beautiful songs until it falls to its knees and surrenders. It will do this, she says, because it will have finally found a sweeter fire than revenge, a sweeter fire than greed. It will have found heaven. It will have found Honjon. And so my grandmother is talking to the colors of the sky at dawn, as she does every morning. And she is saying, Honjon Hasli, Honjon Hasli, Honjon Hasli, Honjon Hasli, which means beauty and joy are restored again. It is dawn, my friends. Let's wake up. The night is over. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I haven't been to a poetry reading in a while, you know, it's nice to be around folks who appreciate this art form because it's so seemingly so simple, but I was just very taken by your poetry, Lucille. Just always reminds me of how something as simple as words can be so precious. So this next poem is called Creator is the Water, and it's just an extended metaphor about, it's actually written about the gorge, you know, over in Taos, there's this really deep, I think it's like 400 feet deep, maybe more, maybe 600 feet deep rock gorge carved by this river, you know, so it's sort of talking about that. So you'll see. I won't spoil it for you, or at least hopefully. When I close my eyes at night, I can feel the rock being cut open by water. I hear a grandfather's song, and it sounds like sand walking down the river bottom. And in this song, they talk about how even the mighty canyon walls were carved by meandering streams. Beneath the gentle waters, there are people not people like you and I, stone people. And when I close my eyes at night, I am one of them. And over lifetimes, she courses over me until I am polished and smooth. She teaches me about patience and commitment. She teaches me how to be gentle, yet persistent. And in her language of trickles and bubbles, she speaks to me and she says, journeys, take them, and try not to forget who you are along the way. I have nothing for you but these words, so place them in your pocket and I will see you again when you arrive at the ocean's throne as 1,000,000 kernels of sand. Her voice hums in my blood, quiet as a stream in the night. And it is this song about how we are all just so loved. The eagles dip their talons into her soft body and pull from it a fish, a flesh meal for their children. They sing this grandfather song with her, and it sounds like feathers cutting into the sky. And it is this song about how even hatred surrenders to wonder. She's breaking my heart apart like a stubborn granite puzzle of problems. And even the hardest doubts and sorrows that I carry are ultimately giving way to her endless grace. And who knew that sometimes grace comes in the form of a raging river until it rips away everything you think you own, all the pain and all the shame and all the blame, takes it away and replaces it with a weightlessness so profound that you can't not cry tears of absolute praise and run all along the riverbanks, shouting like a mad woman to the cattails and the willows and the crawdads and the minnows about the truth, the beauty, about the truth of a creator that breathes through the trees, the truth of a creator that weaves winter out of water and night, the truth of a creator that weaves bodies out of dust and light, and somehow carries us down the river of life over and over again until we finally understand the meaning of forever, forever, forever. In the language of the stones, there is no word for regret, only the complete understanding of what it means to be a beloved son or daughter. We are the rocks, and Creator, she is the water. Right, thank you. Do I have time for one more, or shall I try to wrap up there? I can do either one, I don't mind.
Yeah, you have time
Okay.
for one more, yeah.
I'm gonna actually do a song poem, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, and you can, my voice isn't, okay, cool.
It's perfect.
Earlier today, my headphones were making me sound robotic, they said, so I just want to make sure that's not happening. Indigenous people, shine your light, we are equal, yeah, yeah. I remember the days when our prayers were illegal. I remember the days when being Indian was lethal, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had a rough past, but get ready for the sequel. Get ready for the glorious comeback of our people, oh, yeah. Rise up, all you warriors of love, all all you answers to the prayers of our ancestors from above. I could feel it in my heart. Can you feel it in your blood? I could hear the seventh fire calling us to wake up. All nations rise, rise up, 'cause now's your time. We don't have to hide anymore, 'cause now's our time. With forgiveness as my bow and my prayers as my arrows, pull it back and let go. I watch them fly like sparrows. Have hope, have hope. With compassion as my shield and faith down to my marrow, I will walk the pollen path even when it gets narrow. Yeah, yeah, resurrect. Yes, you can bet that we seen the single mama raising children on the res. We seen domestic violence tear apart what we have left. We seen the alcohol take it on and leave us dead. We seen the children take their lives when they can't take the dread anymore. No, we can't take the dread anymore. Or no, I won't take the dread anymore, 'cause I can't take the dread anymore. Yes, it's a war, but we seen it all before, and now we know we can change it, 'cause that's why we were born. We know we are the ones that we have been waiting for. Yes, we are the ones that grandma has been praying for. So rise up, all you warriors of love, all you answers to the prayers of our ancestors from above. I could feel it in my heart. Can you feel it in your blood? I can hear the seventh fire calling us to wake up. Pueblo hermoso, levántanse, es nuestro tiempo. No tienes que esconderte más, porque ahorita es nuestro tiempo. This next verse is in Spanish to honor all the indigenous peoples who live south of that imaginary border that has divided a continent that was once so very connected. Mujer indígena, tú eres tan sagrada y traigas medicina de tu suelo todavía, a pesar del abuso de tu cuerpo y tu tierra. Respetamos tus ancestros y la suya cultura, hombre indígena. Tú eres honorable y yo veo la fuerza que todavía sobrevive a pesar del abuso de tu raza venerable. Yo respeto tus ritos, tus danzas, tus padres, guerreros del amor y guerreros de la paz. Sí, no vamos a escondernos más. We are warriors of love. We are warriors of peace, and we will not hide ourselves anymore. All nations rise, rise up, 'cause now's your time. We don't have to hide anymore, 'cause now's our time. Yay. Thank you all so very much. It's just an honor to be here with you. Just really appreciating you creating this space. And again, just very, very grateful to be among such amazing poets. And I also just wanted to thank you, Kamala, too, for that very well-crafted introduction. It's very, very inspiring. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, June, Lyla, June. It is really wonderful to hear you. I have heard your CDs before, but it's great to have you right here on Zoom, which is peculiar because I feel like you're just talking directly to us because we are so close in range. So that's a paradox of technology. So you're supposed to be far away, but yes, yet you're near. So I was captivated by your first, by all of them, especially the first one, Hojong, how that word and what it means so many different things. And in all of your poems, you have nature that sort of animates everything. Nature is that a primal force, that spiritual force. So I was wondering, when you're writing or singing your lyrics, do you seek nature images to help you get deeper into your ideas? Are the images particular to certain places that you live in or certain myths that you know?
Thank you for your question. I think I think nature is like the most readily available form of inspiration to actually like write something, because she's so, I mean, it's creator's creation, right? Like, how could you, it's just a reflection of creator's genius. And so like, how can you not be inspired? It's like this really big river that you could just dip your cup into any time, because it's just so in your face how beautiful it is. And so I find when I'm in nature, poetry it's in your face, so but I also like poems that are non-nature based, because sometimes you have to find that beauty inside of yourself,
Yeah.
that beauty that the world has tried to beat out of you, and that beauty that the world has tried to distract you from or make you think you don't deserve anymore. And you have to find that beauty, and you have to reach in there, because the world hasn't made it easy for us to love ourselves the way we should, and the way creator loves us.
Yeah.
And pull out that beauty, even if you're not in a sanctuary of nature. Sometimes you're in a hard place, and you find that beauty in your people, you find that beauty in your own resilience. And I think that's what the third poem is. It's not a lot of nature imagery, but it's that the beauty of our human nature. And I think that is also a very potent source of inspiration, although sometimes it's harder to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think both are very important sources, and there's probably more than that too.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, in one of your songs, you said, I am the rocks, the creator is water. So that kind of explains it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge joy. Thank you.
So our last and final poet is Andrina Smith. I heard Andrina about 3 or 4 years ago when she performed at the National Organization for Women in Suffolk chapter. I was in a program and she had come as the performer for that program. And so I'm really delighted that she can be here today. Andrina Smith is a storyteller, poet, writer, director, and performer whose work frequently explores race and racism. She trained and performed at comedy theaters such as the Upright Comedy Brigade and the Pit to learn how to explore these themes in a funny way. As a Shinnecock native and East End local, her work has been featured at Guildhall, the Watermill Center, and in the National Organization for Women, Suffolk chapter. She was a 2019 Watermill Center Artist in Residence, 2021 Native American Writers Lab Fellow, and a 2021 Guildhall Community Artist in Residence. Artist in Residence. As a storyteller, her work spans multiple platforms. She's a Native American Media Alliance Writer Fellow and a Native American Media Alliance Grant Accelerator recipient. Her works were featured in Edible East End and in Native Max magazine. Welcome, Andrina.
Oh, hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much. Lyla, thank you so much for your words this evening. Both your words and the cadence with which you speak them are such medicine. Thank you so much for sharing. Jeremy, always a pleasure. Kamala, Lucille, so lovely. And to all of you here who chose to come and listen to poetry tonight, because you understood the importance of having connection in this iteration of the world that we're encountering. These moments matter, these moments of reaching out and finding community with one another matter. Oh, and I am so greatly honored to be asked here. Winikisa, Wininukan, Nui Suank, Andrina, Wikantashwa, Wineu Smith. When I hear both my language, or I hear other Native people speak theirs, I hear both the patience and intention that words are said with. It's an intention that we sometimes lose in the speed of American society. And I think this time is causing all of us to recalibrate our relationship with time, our relationship with words. When I think of how frequently Native peoples have been called stoic, I think of that, and I think of my cousins and my aunts and my grandmother and the speed with which they spoke because of all of the things that they were considering. When you walk through the world with not only your intention in mind, but the intention of those around you, the intention of the world that you are walking on, the intention of the communities that you are part of. Carrying all of those requires you to have a groundedness that this last stage of colonial capitalism does not want you to have. So I implore you to take the moments you deserve, because those are yours for the taking. It's been hard for me as of late. It's been hard for me to hold titles, whether that title is poet or storyteller or Shinnecock or Black, or this. It's just hearing titles is a place of healing that I think I'm working through. Growing up on the East End, I was asked to put on many masks to incorporate into the variety of societies of which I got to participate in. And after a while, all that mask switching became exhausting. I'm gonna start with a poem that I wrote today because I wanted to write something for you. My poetry and my storytelling frequently bleed into one another because there's no time where my poetry starts and my storytelling begins. And so this is a poem that came to me when preparing for this meeting today. I want to write a poem for you. I want it to be filled with rhymes that waxes poetically on the times and gives you that feeling of home for you. That smell of your favorite meal and the feel of your body sinking into your favorite corner of the couch, but I can't, because my nervous system is ricocheting, trying to subside this course of anxiety that resides inside of me from the state of the world right now. But I chose the profession of scribe, and I can't try to hide. The world needs compassion from a voice that can provide some. So I take a deep breath and I count the number of blue things I see, or circles, or anything that can ground me to see the items that surround me instead of the thoughts that are around me. Because when I overthink, I can get lost. And I try to remember that this place that we are in, we've been here before. It's like a song that's performed with that cadence of elation that gets redone with each subsequent generation. And we hear the tune no matter the station. As a storyteller, I recall one day sitting around by a fire after the powwow had ended. Well, the day's events of the powwow had ended. Now, at the time, my tribe's firekeeper, his name was Spirit Eagle. And though he was not Shinnecock, he was a man who was Comanche, and he was a man who found his way to our powwow every year of the 25 years that I knew him. I met him when I was 10, and he was already old then. He would ask us to sit around, we would sit around him with him at the fire, and he would ask us questions like, how many Shinnecock or how many Native American names do you know? I'd be like, Shinnecock, Narragansett. And he asked us to come back the following year knowing 5 more and 5 more and 5 more. He was a really huge part of my formative years. And when I was in my 20s, we stopped seeing him. We hadn't seen him come to the powwow. And then one day he showed up. This was around 2012. And he showed up and we were all excited. We're like, oh my gosh, Spirit Eagle, we weren't sure what had happened to you. We hadn't seen you. And he's like, I'm around. And so I asked for his telephone number because I didn't want what transcribed to ever happen again, where we lose touch and I not know if I'm going to see him the next year prior. And so he took my phone number. I was living in New Jersey at the time, and he called me. He told me that Sandy was going to happen and I should get out of New Jersey. So after that conversation, I went to stay at a friend's in the Upper West Side. But during that conversation, we spoke of Sandy, of things to come, of what was to happen. And I said, Spirit Eagle, what do you think of this Mayan prophecy? December 21st, 2012. What is your beliefs on this prophecy? And he told me that he wouldn't be around to find out. Now, it was September of that same year. And I asked him, I said, Spirit Eagle, why? Why? He's like, the world is going to shift into darkness. And that shift is not for me. That world is not for me. And I'm like, well, Spirit Eagle, I don't want to be here during the darkness. I don't want to have to handle that weight. And he told me, Andrina, you're a lighthouse. And when it gets dark, people are going to need you as a port, as a place of safety, as a place to root themselves. And I didn't really understand the weight of those words. My name, Venkateswaran, means woman who is glad and good. And I have reconciled with those two concepts. And what does it mean for me in 2022? For a while, it meant just hiding in my house. For a while, it meant doing internal healing that was restorative to me and recognizing that outside was scary and inside I can regulate. I just got off of a project. I'm sorry, and then I'm gonna jump back into my next poem. I just got off of a project that asked of me to speak on the complicated history of race in our country without offending anyone. And so I leaned into empathy. I leaned into the heart opening that we all share. I leaned into the cadences of joy and recognized that as whatever iteration of this world we live in unfolds, it's in that place of love. It's in that place of joy, and it's in that place of compassion that we're going to find our best foot forward. When Jeremy was speaking before, he shared a story about some of our ceded land, and that is what the poem I'm going to read for you now speaks on. This poem is called The Ballad of the Circassian. The Circassian was the first of many tragedies that have fallen on the men of our nation. We have had a lot of losses, and this was kind of the first one of the really big in recent history that still clings in our air. And I wanted to share that poem with you now. The Ballad of the Circassian. It was just days after Thanksgiving. There was irony abound when the storm of 1876 hit Long Island Sound. The vessel was the Circassian, carrying loads of industrial goods. But when the storm took a turn for the worst, the crew abandoned the ship, as they should. But those insurance men, they wanted their cargo. The wreckmaster wanted his name. And for the 10 Shinnecock men aboard, the money is why they came. They knew their shores like no other sailors. So when there was need of extra hands, there was no comparable seaman who knew the waters of this land. But when the winds had reached a treacherous level, the deck began to trough. And when the Shinnecock sailors wanted to leave, the captain's gun didn't let them off. He thought he could save his cargo. He firmly took a stand and refused all of the Shinnecock men their rightful access to land. And the Shinnecock men in need of their pay, with hungry mouths to feed, went down with their sinking ship to preserve the captain's greed. Beneath Long Island's rushing sea, where there is little sound, are 10 souls of Shinnecock men who never reached hallowed ground. And century in and century out, the same lessons is learned, that Shinnecock lives mean very little when there are profits to be earned. Thank you. So that poem spoke of the Circassian, which was a time when we lost 10 of our Shinnecock sailors out to sea. When you have such a small territory, every person matters. Every death is felt. Everybody matters. And there's a reshifting that happens when we have a loss. And it's been hard because we've had a number of losses over the years, but It's also been beautiful to see the people who step up to fill those holes, to fill those spaces. It's so beautiful to see the work that Jeremy Dennis is doing and fellow tribal members to make sure that that community unity is still maintained. And I'm just very grateful. I'm very grateful. I wanted to share with you, Jeremy had also shared our tribal seal, and I wanted to share with you my beaded version. My aunt made this, and she has some of the smallest beadwork in the world. If you look, this is a size 24 bead. The lady has lipstick on and very cute earrings. I don't know if you see them, but every time I'm like, oh. And holding pieces like this and listening to poetry like Lucille's lets us know that there's history in our art. There are stories in our art. For future generations who unpack Lucille's narratives, they'll hear those histories that might have been lost otherwise. And so this is why there's no separation for Native people between their life and their art, because it's all connected. The last poem that I wanted to leave you on was one that I actually was preparing to share when I had first met Pramila, and this was in collaboration with a project that I did for the Facebook app, and it was called Uplifting Black Voices. They had met people who were Native and found out that they were Black, but didn't have any connection to both. Or people who found out they were Black and wanted to be, who were Black and found out they were Native, but didn't have a connection to both. And they reached out to me to talk about this kind of journey between both worlds. And it was more challenging, this writing process, than I would have thought, because anti-Blackness is something that permeates every area of our country, and Indian country is notwithstanding. My experiences growing up within the communities that I did made me just Andrina. I don't have to have an identity, and don't try and claim one now. And this was a journey for me because my producer was like, say Black Native here, say Black Native. And I learned a lot about holding true to my voice, but I also learned what it means for me to hold racial trauma and what that journey for healing looks like, because it's impossible to live in this country without having some form of racial trauma, whether you're aware of it or not. And so this for me was kind of an exploration of the two sides of my my journey. Oh, I lost everyone. Hold on one second. Okay, there you are. Okay. All right, and so this is my poem called The Darker Red Road. As I said before, a lot of my work speaks to New York, Shinnecock territory, and my experience and my ancestors' experience in those areas. And this is called The Darker Red Road. Wait, there are POCs in the Hamptons? I know, probably not the first thought that comes to mind with the Glamptons, but I'm born, bred, and bled there. And I have a whole legacy of real colorful ancestors who combined to make me. And when people hear that, they want my rendition of Get Out, the sequel, the Hamptons edition. Because my hometown has transformed into the kind of place that has real estate too precious for my colored face. But when it comes to my journey, I'm a real unique case because A lifetime of private schools has given me a pass. I couldn't register for white privilege, but I got to audit the class, and fluency in the oppressor's language has given me the task of speaking my story before it's been asked. I'm Black and Native, some no man's land POC, because when you think Indigenous, none of your first thoughts come to me. And that wasn't by accident, it was all by design in this system constructed by colonial minds with my tribe. We've been here since immemorial times. We were skilled wampum makers, this land's first currency. We mastered our lands and even the leviathans at sea. The colonizers came and mouthed out our stock. Those natives in Moby Dick, they were straight Shinnecock. And 400 years later, here we remain, living under the same banner with the same name and terrain, stepping on the scene in a fully beaded chain. They've twisted being native. So let this be a ligation. We are not a race. We're 573 independent sovereign nations, but labeling us a race frees the feds of their treaty obligations. But my blood bleeds Shinnecock and it's my crown and glory. This may be my poem, but it's all of our story. I'm Black and Native, and Black stories are kept from the collective consistory. But as long as there's breath in my lungs, Scout's honor will be more than a footnote in history. To boot me. Sorry, I'm trying to gracefully find my Zoom button again.
Thank you so much, Andrina. It was wonderful, lovely performance. So the personal is very much political in your poems. You know, history is your story. You show how Native, as Native and as Black, you live it daily. You're a beautiful storyteller, crafting and building your narrative with dynamic and sharp words. I was reading one of your poems earlier. It's called One Indian, Two Indian, Red Indian, Blue Indian. It was an excellent narrative. So I was wondering if you faced any kind of challenges in telling your stories. Like, what are some of the,
Certainly. And excuse me, I'm so sorry, Pramila. That was actually a poem that I was supposed to read as well. If we have time at the end, I don't know if we have time for another. Yeah, that's fine. I'm so sorry. Yes. It was hard for me to admit that growing up, I spent more time around white people than anyone else. I went to school at a private school where Jeremy's sister, actually, and then one other girl from the reservation, we were the only people of color in my class. So from the age of 3 to 12. And then I went to another private school in East Hampton from the age of 13 to 18. And then I went to college at a very small liberal arts school in Boston, Emerson College, where there were 2 other Native students in the whole school. And then I lived in the Czech Republic for some time. And so there was this feeling of, I was never not accepted in the communities that I went into, but the things that I had to swallow, or the things that I had to bury as a part of myself, to exist in communities to make other people feel comfortable wasn't something I understood until I was much older. I didn't realize how much I was sacrificing of myself so that other people can exist because my personal comfort didn't come up. And I'm grateful in the way that when we survive our tools of oppression on the other side, that we can make something come from it. And I'm grateful that I now have the ability to make people feel comfortable in my space from having that been a practice for so many years. But it took me a really long time to learn to be comfortable with myself because, oh, okay, I have to be extra, make sure my stoic is on. Oh, okay, well, I can't show this. Oh my gosh, I sounded like a white girl. And it would just give me this constant anxiety of trying to figure out who I'm supposed to be in a given space. And the freedom that this pandemic has given me, and I hold space for the monumental amount of loss that we've all faced. But as an empath, being able to reclaim my energy has been something I'm so grateful for, so that I can then combat that burden. I don't want to say that burden, that struggle, with the grace and personal groundedness I now think I can, if that answers your question.
Thank you, Andrina. Yeah. I mean, this has been an amazing program, and I just want to thank everybody. But before that, if anyone has any questions for our poets, you can use the raise hand function, or just raise your hand, and I'll you can ask your question. So does anyone have any questions? I'm trying to see in both the rooms. Maybe not.
I have a question, I guess, if
Yeah,
no one else has one.
Sure.
Shoot, maybe this is speaking against the poem you just read, or not against, but like contrary to the, okay, maybe this is not a good question, but I'm hoping it is. If it's not, just tell me. How can not, okay, just tell me this, I'm just gonna say it. How can non-Afro-Indigenous natives support Afro-Indigenous natives, if at all? And is that an okay question? Because I love what you said about like, we're not a race. So I don't want to be like, that was really enlightening to me. But yeah, I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. And it's interesting because the poem that I did not do speaks more directly to my personal experience, where this one was one that I feel was, I was commissioned for this poem. But we were running a little long and I was talking a lot of stories. I personally, and this is what the challenge is, because again, we are such disparate people. I don't identify as Afro-Indigenous because I don't appreciate a hyphen. I don't want a subcategory of Native Americans where it's like, well, we have the natives, then we got the Afro-Indigenous coming in. And it's really hard not to have that dichotomy. For me, one of the biggest things is that I tell natives is, and please know, Lyla, this is what I say to everyone, is just don't be racist. The number of times I've seen Native communities knowingly shun their darker skinned relatives, the number of times I've seen oh no, let's bring the pretty ones to the front. Like, they know what they're participating in. And it was almost a And it almost felt like it was, I can't think of the word right now. But yeah, it just, insulting my intelligence. It's funny. It felt like insulting our intelligence when people are like, Native communities and racism, what is that? And it's a result of a colonial system that supported anti-Blackness. It was rewarded in Indian country if you shunned Black family members. So for me, the best thing we can do is kind of like Encanto. You know, I don't know if you guys have seen Encanto, the movie, but I love it and I watch it frequently. It creates this beautiful world of representation where they don't have to explain, oh, well, he's really dark because his great-grandfather came from, and it's like, I struggle, again, as I say, I was struggling with identity of phrases, or not identity of phrases, but, you know, names of
Labels.
You're this, labels, thank you. I'm losing all of my words. Thank you, Lyla, for being
All
here.
good, it's late.
But yeah, and finding ways that they can be incorporated naturally without it being, and not just during Black History Month, you know?
There's another question from one of our audience members.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oops, it's bent further up. It says, do you think that only people of color can identify with hardships that people of color have had to endure? I don't know, Lyla, do you want to take up that question?
Yes. I think short answer, yes. Long answer. So I'm European partly, which is part of why like anti-Blackness is so obvious to me in the Native community, because people never question my indigeneity, right? Because I'm almost half European, but if I was half of African descent and half Native, people would, I feel like, gatekeep me so much more, you know? So that's a side note, kind of, it's related to what your question is, but anyway, so I am European. So I did a lot of research in my European indigenous ancestry, right? So my European ancestors were burned at the stake, like the women were, mass slaughter of women, and the demonization of womanhood, really. My people were disemboweled in torture chambers as Europeans. My people went through, my indigenous European ancestors went through 2,000 years of open warfare, and are still going through it right now. We're a traumatized people. But the reason I say yes is because even though my European ancestors have been through so much struggle and hardship, at the end of the day, today, we still benefit from Eurocentrism and white supremacist thinking. So what do I mean by that? Europe, specifically Greco-Roman culture of Europe, and anyone with light complexion who gets associated with that, has been positioned as the pinnacle of human evolution, the pinnacle of human thought. And even the most liberal and progressive among us, that still lives in us, that white supremacist ideology. Just, I mean, for example, why in school is Shakespeare required, but indigenous stories of Spider-Woman or the bowhead whale or what have you are not? So these things that the water that we swim in is white supremacy. We don't even notice it sometimes. It's so taken for granted. So even though my European ancestors went through almost identical struggles, like the Welsh language was prohibited from schools in as late as the 1920s. And if you were caught speaking Welsh, you get a block of wood around your neck that said WN written on it, which meant Welsh not. And you could only get this off your neck is if you caught another kid speaking Welsh. So the tactics that were used to brutalize indigenous peoples were practiced on indigenous Europeans first, in every sense, almost every sense. However, even with all of those parallels, I think light complexion, for some visual weird reason, we're such visual creatures, right? Anyone with light complexion is associated with a supreme culture and therefore benefits from that. So at the end of the day, I don't think non-people of color will ever have the same experience, at least not within the past 500 years. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Lyla. And we have one more question for Lucille, if she's here. I don't see her. Yeah, she might have left. Okay. So since we've almost been here like 2 hours, I think we should end the program, even though I'm sort of caught in the spell of all this poetry. I want to thank Kamala Platt for her brilliant introduction. It was wonderful to locate herself in her personal account, her personal history and her connection with Native Indigenous literature. And I want to thank Jeremy for his brilliant presentation. It was so great to see him here again. I had seen him at the Three Village Art Gallery last year when I went to his show. So it was wonderful to see him here. And Lyla's poetry just gave me the goosebumps. Just a wonderful, performance. And Andrina, thank you very much. That poem that you read, especially the last one, was quite hypnotic. And Lucille, fabulous poetry, and especially that last poem was amazing in terms of its range and beauty. And I thank this audience very much. Thank you all for coming. This has been a star program for Matwaala. And I love all this energy in this room here, in the Zoom room. We filled like 3 rooms here, and it's just absolutely wonderful to see you all. And may you stay safe and create, and go out there and look at nature and write, sing, whatever. And the poets have given you so many beautiful words of healing. So just go out there. And Usha will say a few words.
I'm feeling rather speechless. What a remarkable evening. It's been so moving, so profound. When we began these series of readings, we had no idea what this was going to become. It became like a good Frankenstein that's just snowballing. And every reading becomes a reaffirmation and reimaging of names and history and indeed of all of us as a human race. It's a time for recalibration. That's what your poetry tells us and your art tells us. So thank you, Lyla, Lucille, Andrina, Jeremy, and Kamala, for showing again our vulnerability and oneness. You have truly inspired us to keep at our work. Thank you from Matwaala, and thank you for being part of Matwaala. You are the reason we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you all. And thank you, Lyla, for your words in the end. Yes, we are building solidarity with everyone.
Yes, love you all. Have a great night.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Oh.
Okay.